I now give the floor to Mr. Geir Pedersen.
Mr. President, Syria's transition has been rocked this past month by violence and escalation that led to mass casualties, drained trust, and created more dangers of fragmentation. It is clear that some major course corrections on security and the political transition are needed. Mr. President, Syrians are reeling after appalling violence in Suweida, violence that should not have happened, and which also saw unacceptable foreign intervention. I and my deputy have remained engaged with the authorities in Damascus and local actors in Suweida throughout. On 12 July, mutual kidnappings escalated into armed local clashes between Bedouin tribes and Druze groups. The authorities announced the deployment of security forces to Syria to halt the fighting and restore order. During this period, security forces were attacked, killed, and abducted by Druze groups, and there were extremely grave reports of serious violations by security forces against Druze civilians. An initial ceasefire to enable security forces to enter was announced and endorsed and then collapsed. This unfolded amidst shifting positions and fresh accusations of violations, with disturbing footage circulated of extrajudicial executions, degrading treatment, desecration of corpses, looting, and destruction of property, alongside widespread disinformation and sectarian incitement. This dramatic first round of fighting saw hundreds of casualties and injuries among security forces, Druze fighters, and, most tragically, among civilians, particularly Druze. As fighting raged, Israeli airstrikes targeted Syrian security forces and Bedouin armed elements in and around Suweida. Israel later attacked a Ministry of Defense building and struck in the vicinity of the presidential palace in Damascus. Israeli strikes caused casualties among civilians and security forces. Security forces announced withdrawal from Suweida, but testimonies emerged of violations against civilians, including Druze and local Bedouins. Further kidnappings and displacements took place. Amidst intense mobilization, clashes ensued as Bedouin fighters launched a major offensive, re-entering Suweida city with serious allegations of violations by all parties. Mr. President, by 19 July, another ceasefire was declared. Bedouin forces withdrew from most of Suweida and security forces redeployed at the edges of the governorate. Fighting subsided and Israeli airstrikes ceased. Those sporadic skirmishes continue. A fragile de-escalation is largely holding, but the situation remains tense and volatile. Some 175,000 have been displaced, humanitarian needs are acute, and sustained and unhindered access for the UN for humanitarian assistance and for mandated protection agencies remains critical. OCHA will brief you in detail on this. Some exchanges of civilians and combatants that have been held captive have taken place. Mr. President, I condemn the appalling violations against civilians and combatants in Suweida. I also condemn Israel's intervention and dangerous airstrikes in Suweida and in Damascus. I'm seriously concerned by credible reports received by UN Human Rights Office and also my office, indicating widespread violations and abuses, including summary executions and arbitrary killings, kidnappings, destructions of private property, and looting of homes. Among the reported perpetrators were members of security forces and individuals affiliated with the authorities, as well as other armed elements from the area, including Druze and Bedouins. The Ministry of Defense stated that violations in Suweida were committed by an unknown group wearing military uniforms, stating that no perpetrators will be tolerated, even if affiliated with the ministry. The Syrian presidency issued a statement condemning violations and pledging accountability. I welcome this and will watch closely how it is implemented. Let me also stress my concern at reports of abductions of Druze women after the entry of the security forces into particular areas, and at reports of women, children, and men who are missing. The parallels with similar incidents involving Alawite women earlier this year, and which are reportedly ongoing, are alarming. There are growing concerns of emerging patterns in the treatment of women, including by combatants. Mr. President, in this context, we also take note that the Committee for Investigation and Fact-Finding into the Coastal Events has submitted its report to President al-Shara. We have not seen the report and are aware of a range of reactions to the public presentation of it. I urge the authorities to publish the report and ensure justice for victims and accountability for all perpetrators, regardless of affiliations, in line with international laws and standards and the Constitutional Declaration. Mr. President, a sovereign Syria must ultimately hold a monopoly on the legitimate use of force and operate under the rule of law. The authorities inherited a landscape ravaged by 14 years of war and decades of misrule, with numerous armed groups, irregulars, and armed civilians. A fragmented security architecture filled with militias and lacking clear command cannot sustain peace. Disarming and demobilizing this range of actors without provoking further instability is, of course, a major challenge. While there have been security achievements, threats of many kinds, including from ISIL, remain a constant danger. But, Mr. President, sectarian incitement and abusive conduct, particularly during security operations, is simply inexcusable. The state has a clear duty to act professionally and with discipline, even when under attack. It must take control of its forces and ensure visible accountability, key to rebuilding trust, enhancing security, and promoting unity. Syrians must feel that the state and its forces exist only to protect them, as it is the stated policy of the president, and as President Shara has emphasized to me several times. The gap between that policy and the reality on the ground must close. A clear vision and a program of security sector reform, disarmament and demobilization is needed, one that applies equally to all groups. These efforts are closely tied to the need to begin the process of transitional justice, without which Syrian society cannot heal. Mr. President, trust in lasting security depends above all on the credibility of the political transition itself. Loyalty to the state cannot be imposed by force. It must be earned through a genuine process that builds a representative state, protects the rights of all, and embraces all segments of society as equal. Mr. President, since December, I have regularly briefed you on the transition process. I have underscored the momentum scale of the challenges and noted important positive steps echoed by many Syrians. And many Syrians remain broadly supportive of the authorities' approach. But, Mr. President, I have equally been clear that the political transition is not yet fully inclusive. And many Syrians express concern about centralized power, limited transparency, weak checks and balances, and insufficient means for genuine public consultations, participation, and scrutiny. If not addressed, these concerns risk deepening feelings of exclusion and undermining belief in the transition and ultimately in a shared national future. Let me add that I'm concerned when I see signs that space for citizens' expression is shrinking. Women in Idlib who protested the violence in Suweida were threatened with legal measures by the local authorities. Mr. President, the next step, the formation of a People's Assembly, is crucial. It offers an opportunity to embed genuine pluralism and accountability into Syria's emerging transitional political system, as discussed when I met President al-Shara and Foreign Minister al-Shabaini in Damascus. And my team has been engaging the Supreme Committee for Elections to urge an inclusive, transparent, and representative process. The formation of the partially elected assembly is expected to take place in September. We understand that an electoral framework detailing the process for selecting electoral colleges to indirectly vote for members of the People's Assembly will soon be published. We will closely follow this. It is absolutely vital that all major Syrian groups and components are fully included as electors and candidates. The participation of women as electors and candidates is equally fundamental. Ensuring that inclusion generally extends to those areas where disputes remain with the authorities is a key challenge and must be a high priority. Mr. President, also in this context, and turning to the Northeast, implementing the 10th March agreement has proven difficult, and frustrations on both sides were on clear display during this reporting period. A 9 July meeting between the transitional authorities and the SDF leadership in Damascus, with US and French diplomats present, was not able to bridge key differences, but efforts are nevertheless underway for a further meeting in Paris. We are continuing to engage both sides on the importance of making compromises to make progress on their agreed goal of implementing the 10th March agreement before the end of the year. Given the issues between them and the wider national situation, it is essential to build trust and confidence on this track. Mr. President, the question of security, the rule of law, national unity, and political inclusivity cannot be put in separate or disconnected boxes, or be the subject of ad hoc approaches. The political transition needs to be a genuinely comprehensive process that will build real consensus and a shared vision for Syria. And when it is interrupted by violence that leave whole communities feeling endangered, trust is shattered and hard to rebuild. without a broad political foundation that includes not just trusted individuals, but key elements of Syrian society, deeper conflict is, tragically, almost inevitable. I take note that a prominent group of Syrians, drawing on Syria's own historic tradition, has recently proposed a new national conference of a deeper, broader, and more systematic character than what has been possible to date. Mr. President, this is above all a time for flexibility and wisdom. If the state is seen by key constituencies and communities as acting not like a state, but as a threat, positions harden. Equally, if the leadership of such constituencies and communities is seen as slow-walking or opposing genuine integration into one state structure, positions also hardens the other way. This fundamental challenge requires genuine dialogue, real compromise, and active third-party help in support of a Syrian-led and owned, genuinely inclusive political transition process that restores Syria's sovereignty and unity and enables all the Syrian people to shape the country's future. The United Nations is ready to do all they can to help, working with the authorities and all Syrians. The Syrian political transition simply cannot fail. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Special Envoy Pedersen.